Good morning, everyone. I'm Don Lemon. Election night in America rolling into the morning. Here's the state of play at this hour. Control of Congress is hanging in the balance. First, we're going to get to the House. Republicans and Democrats both hoping to hit that 218, that magic number, to clinch the majority here. Democrats have won 178 seats. Republicans have won 198 seats. Same situation is happening over in the Senate. Democrats and Republicans both have 48 seats this hour. It is too early to call some key races, but we're going to talk about what's happening. So Nevada, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia. That's where we're looking closely. CNN has not made any projections at this hour. In Nevada, Republican Adam Laxalt inching ahead of Democratic incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto. In Wisconsin now, Democrat Mandela Barnes trails Republican Senator Ron Johnson. And in Arizona's biggest county, Maricopa County, officials there say that they are done reporting votes until later tonight, and you're looking at a time lapse of votes being counted. Maricopa County there. As it stands, though, incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Kelly is in the lead. Let's take you now to Georgia. Republican Herschel Walker and incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Walker neck and neck. If no one, Raphael Warnock, I should say, if no one hits 50% plus one, we could be in for a runoff, and that's going to take some time. So despite all of this, Republicans in the Senate and the House are feeling optimistic.
What I hope is I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning, and all of you are, maybe even late tonight, and we're going to learn that there is a new Republican majority in the United States Senate.
We need to remember that we don't come together to celebrate the concentration of power. We come together to rejoice in the dissipation of power.
Tonight, we built upon those gains 2 years ago, and it is clear that we are going to take the House back.
Okay, but here's what the House Speaker is saying, right? She says she's waiting on the votes to come in. She released a statement writing that it is clear that House Democratic members and candidates are outperforming expectations across the country. As the current House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, that is what she's saying. So we want to head over now to the Magic Wall and Mr. John Berman, who is keeping us informed. So give us the state of play, please, Mr.
All right,
Berman.
the U.S. Senate right now stands at 48-48 in terms of the races that are projected, with the remaining Senate races in Georgia, in Wisconsin, in Nevada, and Arizona. If you look at who's ahead in these states, you got a 50-50 tie, right? Let's go through this very quickly and talk about this. Actually, I want to start in Pennsylvania, which we didn't show there because we projected this race overnight. I have a feeling that some of you might have gone to sleep before this was projected. John Fetterman, CNN projects, will win the Senate seat in Pennsylvania by a reasonably comfortable margin. He's ahead by 2.5 points. And just for frame of reference, where did he outperform Joe Biden, what Biden did 2 years ago? Almost everywhere. John Fetterman did a really good job in a lot of these red counties. I just wanted to point that out in case you're waking up without knowing who won in Pennsylvania. Now let's talk about these other key races. Let's go around the country to the races that aren't called yet. Ron Johnson in Wisconsin with a narrow lead of 32,000 votes, 94% in. We will watch this closely. There is still a vote to be counted in Milwaukee, just 82% in. Mandela Barnes, the lieutenant governor, the Democrat there, leading by a lot there. He could make up maybe some of the 32,000 vote margin. Can he get all of it? We'll have to wait and see. It is a tall order. In Nevada, counting all night long, they're at 80%. Adam Laxalt has a narrow lead of 22,000 votes. This actually flipped overnight early on. Catherine Cortez Masto, the incumbent Democrat, was ahead. She is now trailing. Very importantly, Clark County, the most populous county in the state, 84% in. But all the votes they have left, mail-in votes, which there tend to skew toward the Democrats. Are there enough votes in Clark County, which is a district, a county that Joe Biden won by 9 points there, for the incumbent Democrat to make up the margin? Possible. Again, we're going to have to wait and see. Mail-in ballots in Nevada can arrive and be counted until Saturday. Let's go south to Arizona. The incumbent Democrat Mark Kelly there with a lead of about 6% over Blake Masters, 67% in, 107,000 votes. Mark Kelly's lead has been getting smaller as the night has become morning. They are counting more votes there. Maricopa County is the crucial county in this state. Joe Biden won it by 2%. Mark Kelly, you can see, has nearly an 8-point lead there. That could bode well for him. They have counted all the election day vote in Maricopa County, which tends to skew toward the Republicans. Just mail-in ballot left to count. However, I should note that in Arizona, some of the late arriving mail ballot that may have arrived yesterday can be more Republican.
How much of the vote is out for overall? 67%?
67% in so far. There's a lot more to count.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to count, and they will be counting, so we'll follow that. We know from the presidential race 2 years ago, the Republicans tend to make up ground as more vote is counted in Arizona. Can they make up enough to close that gap? We'll have to wait and see. Once again, I ended here in Georgia because in Georgia, with 96% reporting, you have Raphael Warnock with 49.2% of the vote. Why is that important? Because in Georgia, if no one gets to 50% plus one single vote, there will be a runoff, and that runoff will be December 6th. The Secretary of State's office tells us they believe this is headed to a runoff. Raphael Warnock is ahead. His lead may even grow some because of the votes still remaining. For instance, in Cobb County, 93% in, still more votes to count there. Fulton County, 95, more votes to count there. These are very Democratic counties. His lead may grow, but the Secretary of State's office does not think it will get to that 50% plus one. What would that mean overall? Again, the reason I put this up here is if things remain where they are, imagine this blue state isn't there, it would be 49 Democratic seats, 50 Republican seats. The Democrats would need to win that runoff on December 6th to maintain control. They need to have 50 seats. Vice President Kamala Harris would break the tie. So we may not know who controls the U.S. Senate until December, Don.
All right. Leave Georgia up there, and the reason why, because I want to get to a political reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. That's Patricia Murphy. She joins us now. Good morning to you, Patricia. We appreciate you joining us. You have been listening to us and our assessment and what John has here on the magic wall. What say you?
Yeah, I think you guys are exactly right. We are going to probably keep Thanksgiving very interesting here in Georgia. We have a razor-thin margin between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker because of that state law that says a candidate needs to get over 50% of the vote. Neither one of them looks like they're going to be able to pull in enough votes from anywhere in the state to get up over that. But right now, it's still too close for us at the AJC to call, so we're not calling the race yet. We're not even calling it as a runoff yet. But this has just been an unbelievably tumultuous race between these two. Herschel Walker, obviously, lots and lots of allegations against him. Raphael Warnock has been able to outperform the rest of the Democratic ticket here in the state for a whole lot of reasons. But if this comes down to control of the U.S. Senate, Raphael Warnock has been here very recently. Georgia has been here very recently. The exact same scenario happened in 2021, and we could be here again in 2022.
Let me just show people what you were talking about there, Patricia. Raphael Warnock at 42% of the vote, about a half percentage lead. If you look at the governor's race here, you can see that Brian Kemp, the Republican, and we have projected he has won this race, he won by almost 8%. So there is, roughly a 7.5% difference between the governor's race, where you were talking, and the Senate race there. That could show you the weakness of Herschel Walker as a candidate, or the strength of Brian Kemp as a candidate, or the strength of Raphael Warnock as a candidate. But there is a very big difference there. Historically, Patricia, there's been a sense that runoffs favor Republican candidates. I should say that historically, because that was the case until 2 years ago, when both Democrats won the runoffs there. Is there any sense who might be favored in a runoff in Georgia?
I think we really need to find out what happens with the rest of these Senate races to know if this comes down to a true referendum on the Biden administration, if this really is all about control of the U.S. Senate, that is going to tend to favor Herschel Walker. We're seeing all kinds of our own internal polling that shows even Republican voters are concerned about Herschel Walker as a candidate, worried about his past allegations of violence, worried about his readiness for the job, his fitness for the job, but they are willing to look past some of those shortcomings of Herschel Walker's if it comes down to controlling the Senate, if it comes down to putting the brakes on the Biden administration. Joe Biden right now has about a 37% approval rating, and then that is why we're seeing this really interesting dynamic between crossover voters between Brian Kemp and Raphael Warnock. Seems unusual, but we've got a really unsettled, unusual Senate race here in the state. And I think it looks like it's going to continue to be unusual and unsettled and very interesting.
Yeah. Patricia Murphy from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, thank you very much. You make some very good points there. She said the Atlanta Journal-Constitution has not called it the race, nor is it called for a runoff. CNN, same thing. We have not called the race, not calling for a runoff. But apparently, voters there in Georgia willing to look past a lot of Herschel Walker's shortcomings if you look at what has been reported about the abortion things and so on and so forth. We'll get back to John in a moment. Stand by. Let's go now to CNN's Victor Blackwell. He's at the voting desk with news on Arizona and Nevada. Good morning to you, Victor.
Good morning to you, Don. Let's check out west. As you said, the two states, 2 of the 4 we're watching for questions about control of the Senate. And in Maricopa County, of course, as John just said, 61% of the votes there in the state. We know that they have completed the day of voting, but right now they're sorting through the early ballots, the ballots that were dropped off. Actually, some video tweeted by the Maricopa County Elections Commission of the machines actually scanning the signatures on those ballots. We have the video of the machinery actually working to show that they are scanning those ballots, staging them. So what will happen over the next several hours is that they will compare the signatures on these ballots that are going through this machine to what they have on file to determine the validity of those ballots. Those will be added to the count. We're told that we will not get an updated report on a count from Maricopa County until this evening. So that county, the great tranche of votes there in the state, will be on hold for a while. Now, in Nevada, the question is, when will we get the votes from these drop boxes? We know that in Clark County here in the south, where Las Vegas is, Washoe County here in the northwest, where Reno is, and Douglas County, much smaller, we'll have to wait until later today or tomorrow, local reports say, to get those votes. None of those votes from the drop boxes were counted on Election Day, so we're standing by to get those counts and add those to the overall report, Don.
Victor, just to sum up what you were saying, be patient, stand by.
Be easy. It's going to take a little while.
There's a lot going on. We've got a lot more to do here, and they've got a lot more to count. So thank you, Victor. We'll get back to you. Now back to Mr. John Berman at the Magic Wall, Nevada.
Yeah, let's talk about what Victor was just showing us there. Adam Laxalt, the Republican, with a 22,000 vote lead, 80% in. He's talking about the mail-in ballot in Clark County. They're done counting the Election Day vote. How much mail do they have to count? We don't know. We just don't know how many ballots they have. Clark County is a very big county. Las Vegas, they're 75% of the vote in the state it makes up. This is a county that Joe Biden won by 9 points. Catherine Cortez Masto may be underperforming there. She's just got about a 5-point lead there. Is there enough mail-in ballot for her to make up the margin she needs to in the rest of the state? It really needs to happen here in Clark County, because if you look at the map, it's the one county where she's leading right now. The other county with the second largest population, Washoe, which is about 15%, she's trailing Adam Laxalt by almost 5 points, only 64% in. She may not be trailing when the counting is done, depending on how much mail there is left to count. Also, we just don't know. But she needs to grow her margins in the mail in Washoe and Clark County, just what Victor was talking about there. And that's going to take some time to count, because the mail, let me just stay on Nevada for a second. The mail in Nevada, it just needs to be postmarked by yesterday, Election Day. It can arrive today, tomorrow, Friday,
right?
And they're going to count it until Saturday. So this could take some time in Nevada. Let's go down to Arizona. Now. We were just talking about that. As Victor pointed out, right now, here's the lead. You can see Mark Kelly, the incumbent Democrat, with a lead of about 6 points. Just 67% in Maricopa County, the most populous county, 61% of the vote. He's got a lead. It sort of mirrors his overall statewide lead. Why is that? Because it's the biggest county. It makes some sense. It's also kind of a swing county. Democrats won this. Joe Biden won this just by 2 points. He's got a lead there. The mail-in ballot will be counted. I guess Victor just told us we're not going to get another update until tonight.
Yeah.
It's going to be several hours.
Yeah.
It's Wednesday morning. So Wednesday night. We're not going to know more until tonight. So we may not know more about Arizona. And Patricia Murphy was talking about what this means overall. Well, if we don't know more about Nevada and Arizona, we don't know who controls the U.S. Senate. Because, look, if it stays like it is, and again, cover this up, it would be 49 seats for the Democrats, 50 for the Republicans. It would all come down to the runoff in Georgia. If somehow the Democrats are able, if Catherine Cortez Masto, to retake the lead in Nevada, then the runoff in Georgia, it wouldn't matter in terms of control of the U.S. Senate.
Everybody's waking up going, whoa!
I know it. I didn't know there'd be math. That's what they're saying when they wake up this morning, and it's only math.
All right, John Berman, stand by. Victor Blackwell, stand by. Everyone stand by. The other big story, the House is still undecided. We have new CNN projections, plus new reporting on what President Biden is waking up to this morning. This is CNN special live coverage.
Republicans will work with anyone who's willing to join us to deliver this new direction that Americans have demanded. But there's no time to waste. Our work begins now. Let's get America back on track. Thank you. God bless.
Okay, so here's the reality. The House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, thought that he'd be waking up with the Republicans in the majority in the House, but the race for control of the House, not over yet. You can look at it right there. Republicans have 198 seats. They've won 198 seats. Still 20 seats away from the 218 magic number that is needed to take control. And right now, Republicans are leading in just 21 competitive seats. The Democrats playing defense. They're on the defense there. They lead in 24. So there is lots to discuss, Caitlin Collins, as it comes to the balance of power in the House, also in the Senate as well.
Yeah, and a lot of those competitive seats that they're going to be looking at for Kevin McCarthy when he wakes up this morning are in California, in his home state. So it might take a while before we actually know the results there. But also, like the rest of America, President Biden is waking up to a lot of results that came in overnight. Congress still hanging in the balance. MJ Lee is at the White House for us. And MJ, you know, President Biden was making a lot of phone calls last night before he went to sleep. Congratulatory calls that the White House wasn't necessarily expecting the number of calls that he would be making last night compared to what the numbers look like now.
Yeah, you know, Caitlin, as the results were coming in late last night, there were two things that Biden advisors felt convinced of. One is that they felt like the races across the board were very competitive. And two, they felt like Democrats had probably avoided a bloodbath that so many had predicted and feared. And what they're waking up to this morning is really reason for that optimism to basically hold up if things sort of stay on track. You know, one thing is, of course, that the Democrats' chances of keeping the Senate, that still remains a real possibility. That door is still open. And second, White House officials and advisors have been glad to see some of these Democratic governors and House frontliners, seeing them win these very competitive races overnight. Of course, a huge outstanding question for this White House, as it is for all of us, is what is the fate of the House and how many seats do Republicans ultimately end up picking up? Because, of course, what ends up happening with the Senate and whether Democrats keep the Senate or not, and then just how big the margin ends up being in the House, that is going to have huge implications for the ability for President Biden to govern in the next 2 years.
Yeah, it seems to ensure gridlock and chaos, given, of course, there will be big questions about the debt ceiling, funding the government, funding for Ukraine. I do want to know, MJ, though, how Democrats are seeing President Biden's role this morning, because he strategically went to certain states. He avoided others, given his approval rating going into this. There had been some criticism of the White House on the messaging front, but how are Democrats feeling about it this morning?
Yeah, I can tell you it has been so striking heading into Election Day yesterday. Democrats were really ready to pounce. We heard a lot from various Democrats, including a lot of House members who were really ready with their finger pointing and the blame game to begin. One House progressive member that I spoke with yesterday, and again, emphasis on yesterday because this was before we know what we know this morning. This is what they told me. They said, we knew the economy would be bad, and they, being the White House, didn't have an economic message at all. So I think this just reflects the key criticism that we've heard when it comes to this president and this White House is this idea that there wasn't a clear enough economic message and that the president didn't spend enough time talking about economic issues. Now, White House officials, of course, have been defensive about their strategy and their messaging, and they would say, you know, there's just no universe where President Biden wouldn't have talked about abortion rights issues, given what happened with the Supreme Court. You know, there's no universe where he wouldn't have talked about threats to democracy when Nancy Pelosi's husband is getting hit in the head with a hammer. So they are going to continue probably being defensive of their strategy, but we're really just going to have to see how the results start to and continue to come in as we head into today.
Yeah, and we'll see how it changes the conversation, maybe about Biden running in 2024, potentially. MJ Lee, thank you. Back with my panel now. John, Nia, you've been here with me for several hours now. We are now joined by Al Schmidt, who is the former city commissioner of Philadelphia. It's safe to say you're having a much different election experience this morning than you were in 2020. You were a main target for Trump, given you were the only Republican who oversaw the election and how it was conducted in Philadelphia in 2020. What are your main takeaways this morning?
Well, both are sleepless nights, whether you're interested in elections or running them. I'd say from Philadelphia, there's two really significant takeaways. One is we've had a lot of lessons learned since 2020. Election directors across the Commonwealth know how to count ballots faster without in any way compromising the integrity of the process. The other thing that I think is why we're knowing results a little bit faster is because in 2020, about half of our voters in Philadelphia voted by mail. And in this election, about 25% of our voters voted by mail. And those are disproportionately Democratic voters. So we had a lot of Democrats vote in person in this election that voted by mail in 2020.
Yeah, and, you know, MJ was just talking about the White House's reaction to this. Obviously, they are happy that John Fetterman has won that Senate seat, defeating Mehmet Oz. But also when it comes to the governor's race, it didn't seem that close with Josh Shapiro and Mastriano. But, you know, what's your reaction to that, given Mastriano is someone who questioned openly the results of the election, was talking about how these elections are being conducted?
And he and others like him had certainly targeted Philadelphia and suggested that, you know, somehow the vote count was underhanded or corrupt in some way, which, of course, was a paranoid fantasy that has captivated so many people's minds. But I think from that race, what I think is particularly interesting is Shapiro's campaign and Fetterman's campaign were so different from one another, but had the same goal. And that goal was to bring in voters other than just their Democratic base, whether it was Shapiro reaching out to moderate Republicans or whether it was Fetterman reaching out to white working class rural Democrats.
Yeah, John,
Republicans.
John, what do you make of that?
Look, that's what politics is supposed to be in America, the politics of addition, not the politics of division. But we've seen the politics of division narrowly win victories, and that was one of the big questions handing over to the national election, right? It was, can these election deniers who can win a partisan Republican primary with Donald Trump's endorsement, can they cross over and win a general election in a purple state? Well, the answer to date seems to be no, right? Pretty decisive repudiations. Now, we'll see what happens as we move west in some of these key races that aren't called yet. But
like with Kari Lake.
Like with Kari Lake and others. But the fact that Democrats narrowly won independent voters last night is stunning in terms of the typical pendulum swing of midterm elections. And that suggests that Donald Trump is a drag on the Republican Party. And that's something that Republicans are going to need to really assess tonight as they look forward into the future.
Well, Republican voters realize that, right? I think Republican leaders have thought that for a while, but they've been following their voters who have a kind of attachment to Donald Trump. They have bought wholesale, essentially, this idea that 2020 was an illegitimate election. They bought it completely into the big lie. So listen, Republicans are waking up to a different reality than they thought they were going to. This, remember, was supposed to be the most favorable political environment for Republicans in decades, right? And it turns out that it wasn't the case at all.
And instead, it might be one of the most favorable for a president, a sitting president whose party typically does not do well in the midterm elections. On that front, Pennsylvania's own Michael Smerconish is also with us this morning. Michael, what are you making of what you're seeing in these numbers, especially for the White House, and what this means for Democrats? Because typically, the White House is bracing for some serious losses here. That is exactly what they would expect, given it is the sitting president. His approval rating is not great. What is your reaction this morning?
So all politics being local, I, of course, am Philly, Burb based. They are a bellwether of what's going on in the national climate. Yesterday, I was with you from Bucks County, and I said, welcome to the swingiest of counties in a swing state. What's amazing to me as I scrutinize these numbers, is how John Fetterman was able to outpace his statewide numbers in those Philly burbs. So in an area where you would think it would be right on the bubble, right on the margin, instead, he blew away Mehmet Oz in Bucks County, in Montgomery County. And it's so shocking, I'm almost reluctant to give the number on CNN because I can't believe it's as high as it is. Josh Shapiro is a resident of Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. That may have accounted for the boost that Fetterman received there. But to answer your question, if I were the White House, I'd be looking specifically at the Philly burbs and trying to take away a lesson from how successful Shapiro and Fetterman were in the final analysis.
Yeah, and on that front, Al, when it came to Mehmet Oz, I heard from a lot of Republicans, a lot of curse words were included in their messages about how upset they were that Mehmet Oz ended up being the candidate because they thought Dave McCormick, who he ran against in that primary and beat him by about 900 votes, they thought he could have actually taken on Fetterman. What'd you make of that? Were you surprised at all by Fetterman's victory?
I think just another aspect to that that's important is that while the former president endorsed Oz, he was really not a favorite of a lot of Trump voters and groups in Pennsylvania. So they sort of came along reluctantly toward the end, and they backed him to the hilt. But there's a lot of thought that, McCormick would have been more competitive.
Did most of that have to do with the criticism that came from the Fetterman campaign saying, he's not really from here, he doesn't really live here, comparing him to a carpetbagger, something that didn't help when he was talking about a Steelers game in the last few days of the race? There was no Steelers game that week.
And the polling and your research does show that issue about not living in Pennsylvania is a pretty significant one. And as I know Michael and others have said, it's not just not living in Pennsylvania, it's living in New Jersey,
right.
Which is a whole different matter.
And sort of not being a man of the people, right? That's what Fetterman in his hoodies and with his tattoos, I think, exuded for so many people. And even the stroke made him more human. And I think voters were very empathetic with his struggles.
And the enormous risk he took in participating in that final debate where he hung a lantern on his problem, and people thought it would really hurt. But, and I think there's a lot to be taken from sort of a populist Democrat reaching out to white working class voters or just working class voters in general, playing outside the base. And again, someone not living in a state for most of their life, you'd think rationally that would hurt. And the deal that Oz made with Donald Trump to get this. But the other national thing to look at is actually Republicans narrowly won the suburbs. So Democrats won independents narrowly, Republicans narrowly won the suburbs nationally. That may be more evident in places like New York than in Pennsylvania, apparently. But that's a fascinating undercurrent to this election.
Yeah, and that's something we'll be tracking closely to see, what does it mean for what 2024 looks like? That's been a big question with the implications there. Thank you all. Stand by. We have a lot more to look at. We still are waiting on some really key Senate races this morning. These are some undecided races. They could determine which party controls the fate of the Senate. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, I guarantee you are watching both of these very closely. We will have the latest for you here on CNN's special live coverage.
We are thrilled at the unexpected high turnout. We are thrilled that the 3 ballot initiatives got passed. And I never thought I'd be so happy about Fox News, but I'm glad they called this election too.
All smiles there in Michigan. Democrats managing to outperform in some races for governor across the country. There you saw in Michigan with Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer winning her re-election bid against Trump-endorsed Republican Tudor Dixon. Democrats have flipped 2 gubernatorial seats so far, one in Massachusetts with a historic win by Maura Healey. She will become the nation's first out lesbian governor. And the other in Maryland, where Wes Moore defeated far-right Republican Dan Cox to become the first African-American elected governor there. Moore will join CNN this morning a little bit later on. So overall, though, the GOP still holds a top job in the majority of states with a history-making victory of their own in Arkansas. That's where Sarah Huckabee Sanders is projected to become the first woman elected governor, following in her father's footsteps. He was the governor of that state once as well. Republicans also winning a few other big races. Florida's Ron DeSantis, Georgia's Brian Kemp, Greg Abbott in Texas, all defeating Democratic challengers. Head over to the man of the hour, Mr. John Berman, to take us through where we are right now. Where are we standing?
I want
What's
to
up?
focus on two of the governor's races out west in states that were also focused on the Senate race. Nevada right now, Joe Lombardo, the Republican, is leading the incumbent Democratic governor, Steve Sisolak. He's got a lead of almost 5%, 39,000 votes there, 80% in. It's the same situation as the Senate race. Let me just show you. In the Senate race, it's a much smaller lead for the Republican Adam Laxalt. So Sheriff Joe Lombardo is outperforming Adam Laxalt there by about 18,000 votes. Obviously, we're still going to have to wait for Clark County, where all the mail ballot that has been received yesterday and then going forward will have to still be counted. In Arizona, it's kind of a similar story. You have Kari Lake, the Republican there, trailing Katie Hobbs. The reason I say it's a similar story, she's behind with about 67% in, about 30,000 votes, but she is overperforming the Republican Senate candidate, Blake Masters. You can see he's at about 46%, she at 49.1%. She is running ahead of Blake Masters, and that 3% difference may very well make the difference in Arizona.
John Berman, we got a lot of road behind us, but we have a lot in front of us as well. So thank you very much. John will be checking in on the numbers throughout the hours here on CNN. We're getting in more votes in the undecided Senate races that will decide control of the chamber. Stand by, everyone. There's more news on CNN right after this break.
We made promises to the people of Florida, and we have delivered on those promises. And so today, after 4 years, the people have delivered their verdict. Freedom is here to stay.
Ron DeSantis winning and declaring victory in front of a rousing crowd. So let's go to CNN's data reporter, our senior data reporter, Harry Inton, at the battleground desk. So here's the question, right? You saw what happened with Governor Ron DeSantis. Won, right? Resounding victory. So did support for Trump cost the GOP votes?
I don't think there's any doubt that it did, Don. Donald Trump, let's start off with just a straight fact. Donald Trump is not a well-liked politician. Look at how high his unfavorable rating is nationally. Look at this. 58% unfavorable, just 39% favorable. And look how the people who held voters who had an unfavorable view decided to vote in this election. Overwhelmingly for Democratic candidates. Look at this margin, 77% to 20% just for the Republicans. But I think there's another way to sort of look at this. And essentially, let's say, who were the people that turned out to vote, right? And who did they say they supported back in the 2020 election? Normally, you would expect high Republican turnout with a Democratic president. But look here. Amongst those who turned out to vote, they said that back in the 2020 election, they favored Biden 48% to Trump's 44%. That 4-point margin basically matches what we saw 2 years ago. And if we look at those who said that they supported Joe Biden 2 years ago, how did they vote? How did they vote? It's a huge margin for Democrats, 92% to 7%. So basically, those people who said they voted for Biden 2 years ago stuck by the Democratic candidates for the House. And this was despite the fact, look how unpopular Joe Biden was. He had just a 41% favorable rating. So when you put it all together and you say, wait a minute, Joe Biden, the incumbent president, is quite unpopular. How did Democrats win? Well, or at least do better than expected? Well, it's because Donald Trump was in the minds of a lot of voters, and they decided, hey, we don't like that guy either.
Harry Inton, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Let's head over now to Poppy Harlow, my colleague. There's going to be lots of Monday morning quarterbacking and lots of conversations happening about where do we go from here, from both parties.
For sure. And a big announcement pending from the former president on November 15th. And does this change any of that? Let's bring back in our team of experts here. And Sarah, let me just begin with you. Sarah Matthews, you worked closely with former President Trump. You were his deputy press secretary until you resigned on January 6th after seeing him not come out and condemn immediately the violent protesters. So when you see what we just saw and what Harry laid out there, what is your message to Republicans this morning that are considering, do we stand by Trump anymore?
I think last night was the biggest indicator that Donald Trump should not be the Republican nominee in 2024. He cost Republicans winnable seats by boosting poor quality candidates. I mean, you look at the political environment, you have record inflation, increased fears over crime, the worst border crisis in history, an unpopular president, and Republican performance was still underwhelming. And that was in large part due to the candidates that Trump backed, that they weren't up to quality. And so I think that this is lessons learned for Republicans that A, Trump is not a national winner, and B, that candidate quality matters. And we need to look more into that.
Months ago now when Mitch McConnell said candidate quality matters. Tom, to you, you know, a lot of the focus, especially in the closing arguments from Democrats, and President Biden chose to close on democracy. Democracy matters. He chose that over closing on the economy. A lot of pundits said that might be the wrong closing argument, right? We don't know who's going to take the House, but this certainly isn't a red wave. What does this tell you?
Well, I think it dovetails with Sarah's point that when you have somebody like Trump pushing bad candidates, the democracy argument actually starts to matter again. That I think it reminds people of what's at stake. You know, there were a lot of, President Biden got a lot of unsolicited advice about talk about the economy instead of talking about what's at stake. And yet, I would say the candidate who came out with the strongest message about that was somebody like Tim Ryan. And it just didn't really fly in Ohio. And I think that actually between Donald Trump and the president making this kind of an argument, I think a lot of voters seem to hear it.
Michael, to you, looking at Biden and the question of, you know, if it is McCarthy, and this is another question we'll get to with you, Sarah, whether, you know, if the Republicans take the House, if McCarthy can secure the gavel. Yeah. But if that's the case, you worked in the Biden White House, you were special assistant to President Biden, you were the press secretary for First Lady Jill Biden. How can the two of them work together effectively? Can they work together effectively for the American people?
You know, I think President Biden, whether you agree with the policies that he's pushed and passed, you cannot say that he's been successful. I think in the first 2 years, he has accomplished enough to last him 2 terms in office. He does not, this shouldn't be about what President Biden does to govern. Right now, the question is going to be about whether Kevin McCarthy can work with him. Can Kevin McCarthy corral his caucus? And can they increase the debt ceiling? Or are they going to hold...
That is such a crucial question.
Yeah, are they going to hold it hostage like they did before? Are they going to vote for a government funding bill? Those are the only 2 things Kevin McCarthy needs to do, and that is his test. It really doesn't have anything to do with President Biden. It is the responsibility of Congress to pass those bills.
He's smiling at me.
I just think that the real test, at least for Republicans, Republicans desperately need a leader.
So who is that this morning?
And that
is still
can Kevin McCarthy see? And with
party.
all of the data, it shouldn't be. With all of the evidence, it shouldn't be. I mentioned every single gubernatorial candidate he endorsed lost. And the ones that
we
he
don't
went
know them all
after,
yet.
well,
we don't know.
Well, it's looking that way. It's looking that way.
We don't know Arizona. Go ahead.
We don't know Arizona. But we do know that he went after Ron DeSantis, and Ron DeSantis won big. We know that he went after Brian Kemp, and Brian Kemp won. We know that he rallied for Dr. Oz, and it didn't work out for Dr. Oz. So I'm just asking Kevin McCarthy, my friend, if he is ready to be the Republican leader that Republicans need. And that will tell us how well he can actually govern and work with the administration to get the policies, the free market policies that Americans so desperately need.
We will get back to you guys very, very soon. Thank you, all of you. We're standing by to get votes from 4 key Senate races. It was a night of historic firsts also for many candidates. We'll bring you some of them live right here. Stay with us.
Not only did candidates win their races last night, many of them also made history. Republican and former White House press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders is going to be the first woman elected governor of Arkansas after she won the office that her dad held for over a decade. New York Governor Kathy Hochul defeated Republican Lee Zeldin, becoming the state's first elected female governor. She had been appointed to the position last year. In my home state of Alabama, Republican Katie Britt becomes the first elected female senator from the state after she won the race to succeed her one-time boss, retiring GOP Senator Richard Shelby. 25-year-old Democrat Maxwell Frost is the first Gen Z member of Congress after he won Florida's 10th congressional district. He's 25 years old. He's going to succeed Democrat Val Demings. She vacated the seat to run for Senate, a race that she lost last night. Democrat Wes Moore going to be Maryland's first black governor and only the third African-American ever elected governor in the United States. In addition to that, Anthony Brown is going to be the first black person ever elected attorney general in Maryland. In Massachusetts, Democrat Maura Healey is going to be the first openly lesbian governor in U.S. history and the first elected female governor in the state. Republican Markwayne Mullin is going to be the first Native American senator from Oklahoma in almost 100 years after he won a special election for the seat left open by the retiring Republican Senator Jim Inhofe. And in Pennsylvania, Democrat Summer Lee is going to be the state's first black woman elected to Congress. She won the 12th congressional district last night. Not only history being made, we still have votes coming in for those 4 undecided races that are going to determine whether or not Democrats or Republicans control the Senate. And the House is also still up for grabs at this hour, despite what you have heard from some lawmakers. We will continue with the surprises as we are still counting the ballots here. That's coming up next.
Hello, everyone. Good morning to you. I'm Don Lemon. It is a morning after election night in America, and the votes, they are still being counted. And control of Congress hangs in the balance. First to the House, Republicans and Democrats both hoping to hit that 218 number to clinch the majority. Democrats have won 178 seats. Republicans have won 199. And right now, Republicans are leading in just 21 competitive seats. Democrats playing defense here. They lead in 24. Same situation for the Senate. Democrats and Republicans both have 48 seats this hour. It is too early to call some of those key races, but we're going to talk about Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada. CNN has not made any projections at this hour in those Senate races. In Georgia, Republican Herschel Walker and incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock are neck and neck. If no one hits that magic number of 50% plus one, we could be in for a runoff. In Wisconsin, Democrat Mandela Barnes trails Republican Senator Ron Johnson. As it stands in Arizona right now, the incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Kelly is leading. And in Nevada, Republican Adam Laxalt inching ahead of Democratic incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto.
We are exactly where we want to be in this race. We have a lot of our votes coming in all across the state yet to be tabulated. We are going to win this race.
We are not done yet. Here's one thing I know. Our positive energy got us to where we are today, and we are going to make sure that positive energy continues to flow this week. We are going to get this done.
John Berman joins us now from the Magic Wall. No gloating now. Everyone urging restraint.
Yeah, well, that's because nothing's decided in the U.S. Senate, right? As things stand, it's 48-48, 4 races that we have not yet projected. They are in Georgia, in Wisconsin, in Arizona, and Nevada. You like this trick when I did it before. Let's see who's ahead in each of these states. Oh, my goodness. If it ended right now with whoever's ahead, it'd be 50-50, which is actually how we woke up yesterday morning. A 50-50 Senate, Kamala Harris would break the tie. Democrats would maintain control. Let's quickly sweep through each of these contests. I'll actually start with the one I didn't show there, which is Pennsylvania. If you went to sleep early last night, you may have missed it. CNN projects that John Fetterman will win this race, which we had thought might be decisive here. It turns out these other races may be the ones that tip this, but this was a Democratic pickup. And if you're curious, John Fetterman did well just about everywhere. This is where he outperformed Joe Biden. Joe Biden's last election there, almost everywhere. A really strong campaign from John Fetterman, leading right now by 2.5 points. Let's go around the country to the other races. In Wisconsin right now, you have the incumbent Ron Johnson leading there by about 1.2%, 31,000 votes. There are still votes to count in Milwaukee, just 82% in. Mandela Barnes, lieutenant governor, the Democrat, has a large lead there. Hard to know whether or not he can make up the 32,000 vote margin with Milwaukee.
You heard Ron Johnson coming out just a little while ago saying, hey, listen, we think that we're in a good spot. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but we're pretty sure that it's over.
You'd rather be Ron Johnson now than Mandela Barnes with a 31,000 vote lead in Wisconsin, but more votes still to count there. Keep going around the country. In Nevada, and we did hear from Adam Laxalt there as well, he is leading by 2.2%, 22,000 votes right now in Nevada. You can see all the red here. He is leading in every county but Clark County. Clark County, by far the most populous, with 75% of the vote. Let me just show you some of the margins enjoyed by Adam Laxalt in the rural counties here. Leon County right now, he's got a lead of, 50%. I mean, granted, that's only 8,000 votes, but these rural counties, he's got huge leads there. Running up the score there, it will come down to Clark County, the most populous county, 84% reporting right now. The remaining vote is all mail vote. All the Election Day vote has been counted. The mail vote tends to favor Democrats in Nevada. Only mail vote left to count. It can be, as long as it's mailed by Election Day, it can be received today, tomorrow, Friday, counted by Saturday. We don't know how much mail vote is left, so watch this space. Nevada still very much up for grabs. Arizona, next door, the incumbent Mark Kelly ahead by 105,000 votes with 67% reporting right now. That lead has shrunk. Blake Masters has closed the gap overnight. Kelly was initially ahead by more votes. As more is counted, Masters is making up some of that margin. Maricopa County, Mark Kelly enjoys a lead of about 8 points there. Joe Biden only won this county by 2.2%. It is a swing county, so Mark Kelly right now is overperforming Joe Biden. All the Election Day vote has been counted here as well. Only mail left to count. Maybe it favors Democrats. Some of the late arriving ballots in Arizona tend to be more Republican than other parts of the country. So again, we're going to have to wait and see. Our Victor Blackwell reports we're not going to get more numbers from Maricopa County until tonight. So it could be some time before we know more there. I want to end this little wrap-up around the country in Georgia.
Georgia, of course, and always all roads lead to Georgia, right?
Raphael Warnock right now leads by 18,000 votes, but the number to look at is this one. I mauled my circle there. He's only got 49.2%. The key number here is 50. If no one gets 50%, there will be a runoff on December 6th, the first week of December. That runoff could very well determine control of the Senate. If you're curious about whether or not Warnock can get to 50, hard to know, right? Hard to know. You can see 96% reported. Where is the remaining vote in Georgia right now of that 4%? The bigger and bluer the circle, the more vote left there. So it's in an area around Atlanta which does favor Raphael Warnock, but hard to see it being enough to get him to 50%. A lot of small red dots. The Secretary of State's office says it believes there will be a runoff there. And in terms of why that matters nationally, again, if I take this out, imagine that Georgia doesn't exist. The Democrats go down to 49, and Republicans have 50. If you have a runoff here and Republicans win here, they would control the Senate. If Democrats win in the runoff, they will control the Senate. So as things stand, Georgia, Don, could be decisive.
Hang on to Georgia, because we're going to head down to Georgia, John, and I want to get now to my colleague. This is closely watched Senate race between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. Our Jeff Zelny's here. He has been following things for us. He's been in Georgia, specifically Marietta, Georgia right now. This race is likely headed for a runoff. We're not projecting that. That's what the Secretary of State's office is saying, likely headed to a runoff. Good morning to you, Jeff.
Hey, good morning, Don. As day breaks here in Georgia, both campaigns are planning for a runoff. We will wait and see as these remaining 4% of the votes are counted, as John was just saying there. But the campaigns are not waiting. And party officials from the Democratic Party and National Republican Party are not waiting either. The next 4 weeks could be very critical in terms of who controls the U.S. Senate. Now, looking at these numbers overnight, here in Cobb County, just north of Atlanta, this is a critical area that really tells tells the story of this race, and it tells the story of the underperformance of Republican Herschel Walker. The governor's race in Georgia was called early. Republican Governor Brian Kemp had a commanding lead and defeated Democrat Stacey Abrams. But Herschel Walker underperformed Governor Brian Kemp significantly by more than 160,000 votes. So as the rest of the votes are counted, both candidates overnight had this message for their voters.
We know that once again, the people of Georgia showed up and said loud and clear that you want a senator who's going to do the work for Georgia. That you want someone who every day is going to wake up and work for all of Georgia. And that's the work I have committed myself to doing from day one. Somebody who understands that we, in the words of Dr. King, are tied in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality, that what affects one directly affects all indirectly.
I'm like Ricky Bobby. I don't come to lose. If you can hang in there a little bit longer, just hang in there a little bit longer, because something good, it takes a while for it to get better. And it's going to get better.
So Herschel Walker is saying something good takes a while to get better, but the reality is he is trailing Senator Warnock now. So heading into the next 4 weeks, again, the votes from last night must be counted first, and they will be counted. But officials here are not saying that or expecting that there's enough for either side to determine a winner. But more importantly, before we declare this a runoff, let those votes be counted. But the campaigns are not waiting. They are preparing for this as though control of Senate depends on Georgia, and it well might. But it's pretty ironic that the very beginning of this election cycle, think back to January 2021 when Raphael Warnock won in the first place in the heels of President Biden narrowly carrying Georgia. It is now ending in Georgia likely as well, with both parties now turning all of their attention back here to Georgia. Don?
Got to give it to him for that Ricky Bobby reference, so thank you very much there. Appreciate it, Jeff Selny and Marietta, Georgia, for us this morning. Caitlin, listen, there's a lot to discuss. There's going to be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking about what happened. And look, also in Georgia, this could go to a runoff, so it's not over yet. We won't know for weeks.
Yeah, it could potentially be weeks. That's something people have been bracing for. At least it won't be in January. It'll be actually in December this time. So who better to discuss all of this than Jeff Duncan, Lieutenant Governor of Georgia? What do you see? You think a runoff is going to happen?
Well, statistically, it certainly looks like a runoff. There's only a handful of votes left. I think 4% heavy inside the metro area. So, yeah, it does feel like it's going to go to a runoff.
You said not that long ago that you were not going to vote for Herschel Walker or Raphael Warnock. Does that change if the balance of power in the Senate depends on this race?
So my actual answer was I didn't respect Herschel Walker yet, and he had not earned my vote, and I was not going to vote for Raphael Warnock. So we still have 4 more weeks. But, you know, I think a lot of Republicans like me are waking up this morning going, what could have been? What could have been if we would have picked a better candidate that could have won with a margin like Brian Kemp? That would have been able to put real leadership on display, real ideas on display, win the hearts and minds of Georgians, and get the state back to being fully red.
And Brian Kemp had this resounding victory despite the fact that Trump, had once predicted he was going to go down in flames at the ballot box. He defeated his Trump-backed opponent in that primary, and then, of course, he had a big victory last night. What message does that send, do you think?
I think it sends a message to the country, along with some other states, that this is truly a pivot point for the Republican Party. This is a time that Donald Trump is no doubt in the rearview mirror. And it's time to move on with the party. It's time to move on with candidate quality. It turns out Mitch McConnell knew what he was talking about candidate quality. We've seen it in Georgia and other places around the country where if they would have just woke up 12 months ago and stopped taking his lead and took the lead of what real Republicans, real conservative policies meant and mattered, we'd be in a different place.
We're still waiting to see what happens with the Senate, of course, and with this runoff. We're also still waiting to actually see who controls the House. It seems like it's going to be Republicans. That remains to be seen. Do you think Trump had the worst night, though, by far of anyone else last night?
I wouldn't want to be the one delivering him the news last night or this morning as to what the results were of the candidates they supported and poured money into. But, it's time to turn the page. I'm ready to move on. And who knows? I think Donald Trump's moving from a movement to a distraction for the Republican Party now.
We'll see if others agree. Obviously, he had a hold on those primary voters, just not the general election voters. You know, he was not in Georgia in the last several weeks for this race. Neither was President Biden, noticeably. Do you think that changes if there is a runoff in the state? Will we see President Biden or former President Trump in the state?
Actually, it was months. From my recollection, I mean, it was months. I don't think there was any campaign that wanted Donald Trump to show up, or Joe Biden for that matter. I mean, they were both toxic down the stretch. Look, I can't imagine anybody would think Donald Trump would be a tailwind to Herschel Walker's campaign in a runoff scenario. I can't imagine anybody doing that calculus, and except for one person, and that would be Donald Trump.
Yeah. It's fascinating to see, you know, who is going to potentially control the Senate because of this, if there is going to be this runoff that they had been hoping to avoid, and whether or not Kemp not being on the ticket, if there is a runoff, if that affects how Walker does.
Yeah, there was 200,000 folks by quick math this morning that were ticket splitters that voted for Brian Kemp and specifically voted for Raphael Warnock and not for Herschel Walker. I think there's some time to still tell if this is in the balance, right? This runoff could be two separate scenarios. If it is the balance of the Senate, it's a national race again, hundreds of millions of dollars pour in. If it ends up not being in the balance, then it's back to small dollar donations and barbecues, you know, 7 times a day and good old-fashioned runoffs.
When I asked Governor Kemp if he had heard from voters who were splitting their tickets, voting for him but voting for Warnock, he said he would leave that up to the focus groups to determine, you know, what the thinking was there. Jeff Duncan, thank you for joining us on this.
Absolutely.
Don, you know, we're waiting to see what is going to happen in Georgia, but also, you know, the White House is watching very closely what is happening in that Nevada Senate race as well. Also, of course, Arizona, the races there when it comes to Kari Lake and who is going to actually be the governor of Arizona.
Yeah, and Republicans around the country are watching and they're listening to, you know, things like what the lieutenant governor had to say about the former president getting into this race and exactly what he means going forward for the Republican Party. So thanks to both of you. So we have talked a lot about Democrats' strategy of funding election deniers here. Harry Enten, did that pay off?
I think it did. If you look across the board, we look at a bunch of races where Democrats decided to fund these election deniers, and they pretty much went all in and undefeated. So let's start in Pennsylvania governor, right, which I think is one of the marquee races. Look at this margin. Josh Shapiro over Doug Mastriano, nearly a 13-point margin. But it's not the only one. Let's go to Michigan 3. Michigan 3, I think, is a fascinating race because Peter Meyer was the Republican incumbent there, and he, of course, voted to impeach Donald Trump. And there was a lot of people thinking, how could you do that? How could you basically get at this guy who's kind of working towards the middle? But it seemed to pay off because look at this. John Gibbs, the Republican candidate, losing by 13 percentage points. Let's go to New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Senate race. This is another one. Look at this margin. Maggie Hassan up by 10 points. I honestly thought this race was going to be closer. Some of the late polls had it close. It wasn't close at all. Maggie Hassan with a double-digit victory. Let's go to one race where perhaps it didn't necessarily work as well, and that is in the Arizona governor's race, where we have not called anyone. Kari Lake is only about 2 points behind Katie Hobbs with a bunch of votes to get counted, but that was really the exception to the rule. So let's go back to New Hampshire, the 2nd district there. This is, again, a race that just is not close at all. Look at Annie Kuster. I'm from that district, or I once lived in that district, I should say, went up to college in Dartmouth, and you can see right here, Annie Kuster with a large lead over Robert Burns, double digits yet again. Let's go down to Maryland's governor's race. Because this is a race in which, you know, Maryland's a very blue state, but obviously Larry Hogan, the incumbent Republican governor, much more towards the middle. Republicans decided to go in a different direction with Dan Cox. Look at this margin, Westmore, an over 20-point margin. Finally, let's shoot over to the Midwest. We'll go over to the Illinois gubernatorial race. And what we see here is, again, a very wide margin in that race. J.B. Pritzker, double-digit margin over Darren Bailey. They basically picked Bailey out of the Republican field. It seemed to pay off. So across the board, it does seem that the Democratic strategy worked, despite a lot of critics, especially those in some of the media. Don?
Yeah, there was a lot of consternation about that. Thank you very much, Harry Enten. Poppy Harlow, speaking of strategies, both Democrats and Republicans are going to be trying to figure out, how do we do better next time?
Yeah.
What is next time going to be like?
And to Harry's point, and let's bring in the panel. I mean, let me just go to you, Tom. It worked, okay? Harry showed us it worked. If it worked, does it make it right? And should Democrats keep doing it?
I think it was a really dangerous gamble. I'm not sure that we have all of the results. I mean, you know, Arizona is still out. I think there are a lot of Democratic candidates in state and local offices that needed help. I mean, this is, I gamble now and then. This is like going in, putting all your money on red, spinning the wheel and making it and saying it was a smart bet. The best you can say is that it worked out.
This time.
This time.
Michael, you liked it.
I did. I liked it. I
Why?
thought it's risky, of course, but all strategies are risky. A couple years ago, Senator Claire McCaskill ran for re-election in 2012 and did the same thing in her contest with Todd Akin. She got the candidate she wanted. It's smart politics. Nobody was complaining back then.
What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, it's a gamble, and it seems to have paid off for Democrats so far in the races that have been called. But at the same time, I think it's extremely
You're someone
irresponsible.
who left the Trump White House because of the lies, because of the election denialism that led to violence and deaths and the insurrection, and the president not standing up to it. So to see candidates who perpetuate those lies propped up, doesn't matter from folks from either party.
Exactly. And I think I didn't want to see election deniers win, and I'm still, curious to see what the results will be in Arizona. But Democrats have been saying, this whole campaign in 2022 that democracy is at risk, but then they took the chance of backing some of these election deniers. And I just think that's irresponsible, but it seems to have paid off.
Very quickly, yeah.
To Michael's point, I think it's one thing to do that when there's kind of the political breathing room to do it in a year like, say, 2012, when democracy is on the ballot, when you have people that are running on a platform of attacking the Constitution. I think it's dangerous.
It was very risky for Claire McCaskill. She was running in Missouri, which is hardly a Democratic state, in a year that Obama was at the top of the ticket. And her opponent was, calling legitimate rape. And now we've seen the consequences of having pro-life senators confirming pro-life judges. They'll have a lot to do with that in this election.
Abortion was clearly a big driver, too, in these races. Right, Don, let me get it back to you.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it, Poppy. So the big headline this morning, control of Congress up for grabs. The House undecided, the Senate undecided. Votes are still coming in. This is election morning, a morning after on CNN. Everyone, I'm Don Lemon. Here's the big news this morning. Control of the House and the Senate still up for grabs right now. In the Senate, there are 4 undecided races, including 2 out west. In Nevada, Republican Adam Laxalt is leading incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto. In Arizona, incumbent Democrat Mark Kelly is leading Blake Masters. We have reporters in both states. We're going to start, though, seeing Rosa Flores live for us in Las Vegas this morning. Rosa, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. What are you seeing and hearing on the ground there?
Well, democracy is at work here in Nevada, Don. As you mentioned, this is a tight race. We were all expecting for this to be a very tight race in the U.S. Senate, and that's exactly what we're hearing. Both candidates very optimistic still about their chances of winning here. As you know, Senate incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto, she's the first Latina senator, the first female senator here in the state of Nevada, but also one of the most endangered Democrats. Here in Nevada in 2020, President Biden won only by a 2.4% margin. Her challenger, Adam Laxalt, the former attorney general here in the state of Nevada, he also led the failed attempt at overturning the 2020 election. He won the endorsement by former President Donald Trump. A lot of people very energized here that I talked to yesterday about voting here in the state of Nevada. I'm in Clark County, where more than 70% of the state's more than 1.8 million voters are located. Now, this election is like no other, Don, because in 2020, Nevada imposed a universal mail-in ballot. That means that everybody got a ballot in the mail unless they opted out and decided not to. And so long as that ballot was postmarked by Election Day, that ballot is going to be counted until Saturday. And so here we are, Don. We're still waiting. More ballots still to be counted. Democracy at work here in Nevada.
All right. Thank you, Rosa Flores in Las Vegas. Clark County, as a matter of fact, John Berman joins us from the Magic Wall. She's right down there.
She's right down here, Rosa. Right there. We'll put a yellow dot where she is. I want to point out Adam Laxalt, ahead by 22,500 votes. He leads by 2.7%. Let's write that down. R plus 2.7%. Why do I want to show you that? I want to quickly compare that to the governor's race in Nevada. There's a competitive governor's race there. So the Republican gubernatorial candidate, Joe Lombardo, is actually ahead by almost 5%. So the Republican Adam Laxalt is underperforming the governor candidate on the same ballot there. And the difference, that difference of about 2.5%, that could be decisive there. I'm going to keep this up just for 1 second. This margin, Republican by 2.7%. I want to compare it to the presidential race 2 years ago. Joe Biden won by 2.4% overall. So there's a difference. That was Democratic plus 2.7. Now it's 2.4. Now it's Republican plus 2.7. Let's go back to the Senate race and look what matters most now. Clark County, where Rosa was right there, 84% reporting. This is where the Democrat, Catherine Cortez Masto, the incumbent, will need to make up the margin. She trails by 22,000 votes. All the Election Day vote has been counted. The mail-in vote is what needs to be counted now. Mail-in vote can be counted until Saturday, Don.
All right. Thank you very much. I want you to stand by, Mr. John Berman, because we're going to take a look at what's happening in Arizona. That's where Democrat Mark Kelly has a sizable edge so far in that Senate race against Republican Blake Masters. And that's where we find our Sarah Seidner this morning, live for us in Phoenix. Good morning to you, Sarah. Kelly took an early lead, and the question is, will Kelly be able to hang on to that with the mail-in ballots from Maricopa County when they're counted in the hours ahead?
That is the big question. And it's not just Mark Kelly. We're also seeing Democrats ahead just slightly in the governor's race, as well as the Secretary of State race. And there are folks that really argue that the Secretary of State race beyond the Senate race is a very important issue because all of the Republican candidates from those three big races are all election deniers. In other words, they do not believe that Donald Trump lost in 2020. And the Secretary of State, as you know, Don, is the person that certifies the election. So in the next presidential election, that person, if Mark Finchem wins, would be in the position to say, look, I don't believe the results if they go against the person that he wants to win. So it is one of those things that a lot of people are watching Arizona. The count has been going. We are just now over 60% of the count has come in. These races are close, but so far the Democrats in all of those races are ahead, and they're feeling very good this morning. They are feeling very happy about what they're seeing. But again, there's still a good number of votes that still need to be counted. And as you likely know, that here in Maricopa County, this is the most populous county in the whole state. And usually about 85% of people vote early, which is why you're being able to see some of these counts, because these are all of the early votes coming in. A lot of people vote by mail. A lot of people vote by drop box. Some people came in early. So we are able to see results like literally an hour after the polls closed. There have been some issues here with voting equipment that happened. The county officials actually apologized for it, but said every single vote will be counted. Just be patient.
All right.
Don.
That is good advice. Thank you very much, Sarah Seidner. We appreciate it, Sarah, joining us from Arizona. The Democrat, they may be feeling, she said they're optimistic, but not so fast.
Right, exactly. Very quickly here, you can see Mark Kelly with a lead of about 6 points right now. In the gubernatorial race, you have Katie Hobbs, less of a lead there, about not even 2 points. But as you were saying, there's more vote to come in. We learned a lesson in Arizona 2 years ago. Let's look at the presidential race. You know, I'm going to write this down right now. This is Mark Kelly. This is D plus what? D plus about 6? D plus 6 right now. Let's go to the presidential race from 2 years ago. And I want to wind the clock back, okay? When there was 72% in, Joe Biden had a lead of some 218,000 votes. That was the first votes on election night. By the next morning, where we are now, that lead had been cut to 130,000 votes. By Wednesday, which is where we are noon, down to 93,000. You can see, then keeps on shrinking. Thursday, just 68,000. Sunday, it was 18,000. And then ultimately, week after Election Day, 14,000. And by the time it was all done, it was just 11,000. So the lead got smaller and smaller and smaller. Kelly's at 0.6 now. You could expect it to shrink. Does he have enough of a pad That's what we're going to have to wait and see, Don.
You say Arizona is different, especially when it comes to mail-in ballots, right?
It can be. So in Maricopa County, which is 61% of the vote right now, we know all the Election Day vote has been counted. Only mail vote left to count. One of the things we did see, while mail vote tends to skew Democratic around the country, in Arizona, some of the mail-in ballots that are actually brought in on Election Day or mailed in arriving that day can be more Republican than in other parts of the country.
All right, John Berman, thank you very much. We have been focused on the Senate, but the House is still undecided this morning. That is significant since so many predicted an early red wave. Make sure you stay with us because this is CNN special election coverage. So overnight, the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy thought that he'd be waking up with the Republicans in majority in the House. But the race for control of the House, not over yet. Republicans have won 199 seats, still 19 seats away from that 218 that are needed. So right now, Republicans are leading in just 21 competitive seats. The Democrats playing defense, they lead in 24. To Mr. John Berman over at the Magic Wall to help us make sense of the balance of power in the House of Representatives.
All right, just to reiterate what you said, right now these are the races where we've already projected winners. Republicans at 199, Democrats at 178. You can see we've projected winners in 14 competitive seats for Republicans, 23 for Democrats. In terms of the competitive seats, Republicans need to win 30 competitive seats to take control of the House. Democrats need to win 53 to maintain control. So Republicans need to figure out a way to get 16 more seats here. Now, where are they ahead? They're ahead in enough of them. They're ahead in 35 of the remaining seats, which would give them 221, a majority, but nowhere near the majority I think that Kevin McCarthy was hoping going into yesterday, into Election Day. I'm going to put a different filter on here and take a look at the competitive seats in the country right now. And really focus in on a couple things. Actually, let's start with Colorado, because I think this is fascinating. This is Lauren Boebert's seat here. Not even a seat that we considered to be competitive leading into Election Day. Lauren Boebert is trailing by about 3,500 votes. Lauren Boebert is a election-denying, very conservative Republican. Democrats would love to unseat her. I'm not sure they thought they had a chance to. They have a chance to unseat her. 90% reporting. Let me just look at the counties here and so people can see where is the remaining vote here. Let's go down to the 90%. These are the places that have, more than 10% left. This is Garfield County. This is a Democratic-leaning district, very slightly, only 86% in. Down here, not a very big county. Montezuma County, this is a Republican district. You have 88% in. There's not a ton of vote left. We'll have to wait and see if she's able to make up that margin and maintain that seat. Where could the control of the House be decided? What if I told you that New York State, this very blue state, may be what where it all comes down to right now? There are 10 competitive districts, we think, in the state of New York. Right now, Republicans lead in 8 of the 10 competitive districts. If you go back 2 years, Joe Biden won in 8 of these districts. So it's almost a polar opposite of what you might think going into Election Day. Democrats trailing in so many of these districts, including Sean Patrick Maloney, the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Right now, he's 3,000 votes or so behind. It's very close, but 98% reporting. We'll see if there's enough vote for him left to make up that margin. But can you imagine if control of the U.S. House of Representatives came down to New York State?
Down to usually blue New York State. Thank you, John Berman. We'll check back in just a little bit. Caitlin, there's lots to discuss this morning.
Yes, there is. And John Avalon really wants to talk about what John was just noting there, which is, of course, the pickle that Democrats have gotten themselves into when it comes to New York, and something that we've been talking about for a while here, which is what that map looks like. And the big question, though, is on the other side for Republicans is if the margin is smaller than what Kevin McCarthy thought it was going to be last night, how much more difficult does it make his life going forward?
Much more difficult. And let's get real. The benchmark for elections where the president is below 50% approval rating in the midterms is 46-seat gain by the opposition party. That's the historic benchmark going back to 1982. And Joe Biden is definitely below 50% approval rating. So that's not going to be where Republicans are. This is going to be much tighter, and that's going to make the loudest, most extremist members of his caucus more powerful because he's going to need every vote he can get. The other thing to keep in mind is it's those very extremists and the election deniers that were on the ballot because of Republican primaries and Trump's endorsements that end up making, I believe, independent voters swing for Democrats narrowly over Republicans, which is unheard of in out-year elections. So it's going to also come down to these states where there's redistricting, where Republicans have effectively redistricted in Texas and Florida and Ohio. But Democrats tried the same thing in New York, overreached, got blowback, and that's why those districts are competitive right now. Non-extremist candidates and a map that's more fair and therefore is favoring Republicans today in New York.
And so what does that look like if that is it? Because the hurdle is not just getting people in line for policy initiatives and whatever they're going to be doing with the Republican majority if they get it. It's first getting over the hurdle of becoming House Speaker for Kevin McCarthy, if that's the case.
It's going to be a messy process, I think, because you're going to have sort of the loudest, what used to be sort of the Tea Party caucus, which is now sort of I don't want to say crazy caucus, but it's like the Marjorie Taylor Greene, a wing of the party. They are going to be trying to wrestle sort of the microphone from the more sort of moderate folks in the party. I do think one thing that we'll see is lots of investigations into the Biden administration, into the origins of COVID, into the last days of Afghanistan. And I think the question for Republicans is that's certainly something that their base wants, but do they risk overreach, right?
Yes.
Do they, risk,
answer that question.
again, highlighting sort of these niche base issues that, again, independent voters don't really care about. Moderate voters don't necessarily care about that. So does that in some way sort of enhance Biden's standing as a kind of moderate if you've got a more kind of extreme wing of the Republican Party launching all these investigations when Americans are caring about bread and butter issues?
And I read through the statement that Marjorie Taylor Greene issued saying that she was going to make sure she holds her party accountable, so we can expect her to be a vocal voice as well. Don, these are going to be critical decisions by the voters that really determine what a potential Republican majority in the House could look like.
Right on. And someone we can talk about that with is Mr. Mark McKinnon. He's a former senior advisor to George W. Bush, President George W. Bush, and McCain campaigns, or President George W. Bush, President George W. Bush, and Senator John McCain's campaign. Also, the creator and co-host of The Circus on Showtime. Mark, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's talk about election deniers. You and I have talked about that a lot. What kind of a night was it for them?
Well, good morning, Don. With you all, I am sleepwalking confidently through uncertainty this morning. Listen, the one net takeaway that I have this morning is that democracy was on the ballot and democracy won because almost across the board, Don, election deniers lost. And in a lot of cases, like Mastriano in Pennsylvania, lost big. So bad night for election deniers, bad night for Donald Trump. Pretty good night for Joe Biden. I was reporting from the White House last night. It was clear even midway through the evening that they were feeling good about at least the possibility of holding on to the Senate, which didn't even seem like that was even possible a week or so ago. That abortion turned out to be a very relevant issue, that it hadn't lost its steam. It had a lot of heat. And that in the blue states that Joe Biden went into, they did well. So Joe Biden, there was a little bit of wind that Joe Biden brought to the table.
All right, stand by. Let's bring John in. John, let's talk about, before we get to Joe Biden, let's talk about the election deniers part of it.
Here's Pennsylvania. What Mark was just talking about there. Doug Mastriano, he got his clock cleaned by Josh Shapiro here in Pennsylvania. And Josh Shapiro may have had coattails in the Senate where John Fetterman beat Mehmet Oz, not exactly an election denier, but a Trump-endorsed candidate in Pennsylvania. You can see the difference that made there. Let's look at New Hampshire. Again, let's look at the New Hampshire Senate race. Don Bolduc. A lot of people thought, maybe he had a chance heading into Election Day. An election denier, and then he kind of switched and then went back to it. Maggie Hassan, the incumbent Democrat. Again, that's a clock cleaning right there. A 10-point margin in New Hampshire. Election denying didn't do it. Mark's right.
Yeah. Let's talk about the president. The president, visited New York, right? It's close. I'm not sure how well New York did, but the governor pulled it off in the state. There's still yet to be determined about some other races here in the state.
Right. The governor's race in New York, yes, a narrow victory for Kathy Hochul. Much narrower, by the way, than 4 years ago. You see Andrew Cuomo won by 24 points. Now you have Kathy Hochul very narrowly ahead. What Mark was talking to, I don't think there's any state that Joe Biden went to more than Pennsylvania, right? I mean, Pennsylvania, he was there all the time over the last 2 years and a lot over the last few weeks. Again, Josh Shapiro with a convincing victory there. And as Mark was saying, John Fetterman as well.
And Mark, can you weigh in on New York? I mean, it's surprising that in blue New York you have, in the governor's race, listen, I know that she did win. People thought it would be even closer than that because of the polling. But, I mean, something has shifted. The ground has shifted here in New York State.
Well, I think there's a lot of lessons across the board for both Republicans and Democrats. I mean, the Democrats are suffering from a lack of strategy in the gerrymandering that went on in New York, and we're seeing the results of that. But it also shows that, that the Republicans saw a scalp in Sean Patrick Maloney, went after it, spent a ton of money, and they may walk away with, they went across enemy lines for a general, and they may get him. So that's one of the few bright spots for Republicans today is in New York, which is so counter to conventional wisdom. And by the way, the thing I love about this morning is that so much was wrong about what we all thought and the media thought was going to happen today, which of course makes this morning so interesting and elections so dramatic and entertaining.
Mark, Donald Trump, right, had a bad night, not just to the election deniers, to the people he endorsed do poorly, but Ron DeSantis in Florida, who may run against him in a primary. What do you credit just the enormous victory that DeSantis had there, too?
Well, if you spend any time down in Florida, it's really clear that, the notion about Ron DeSantis that he's sort of a strategic Donald Trump. He has a really good instinct for the cultural pulse of the country and the Republican Party. He went after Disney just left and right across the board. And, he's one of the first guys to really, put a spear into the COVID situation down in Florida and opened up a lot earlier than other governors. So he's got he's the guy that a lot of Republicans are putting their money on. And then that equation's changed a little bit with Trump, starting with Mar-a-Lago, where the Republicans kind of rallied to Trump. But I'd say, the very net takeaway from last night was Donald Trump had a terrible night. Ron DeSantis had a great night, and that's equation the Republicans are talking about a lot this morning.
Listen, I got to run, but we talked about election deniers, but quickly, was it a good night for Trumpism or a bad night?
No, bad night. A bad night. It's a bad night. I think a lot of people are saying that it's time to put Trump in the rearview mirror.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mark McKinnon. We appreciate that. So
kick it, Don.
All right, kick it as well. He made history last night, and this morning he is talking about his big win. We're going to talk to the first member of Gen Z who is heading to Congress. That's next.
Well, it was certainly a history-making night last night. 25-year-old Democrat Maxwell Alejandro Frost has become the first member of Generation Z to win a seat in Congress, beating Republican Calvin Wimbish in Florida's 10th congressional district. He will be the youngest member of Congress. He will also serve as the first Afro-Cuban member of Congress. And Mr. Congressman-elect Frost joins me now. Good morning to you. Congratulations. A whole lot of history made there. And as I understand it, not long ago, you weren't even going to run. And then a call to your biological mother changed everything. Is that right?
Yeah, 110%. Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, I was asked to run early last year by some organizers here in Orlando. First thing I said was no. But communicating with people and talking with folks in the district, people were excited about it. And I was at a crossroads and didn't really know what I wanted to do. And connecting with my biological mother, hearing about her story, hearing that she had me at the most vulnerable point in her life, really reaffirmed what I believe in and why I ran for Congress.
President Biden called you, so did Speaker Pelosi. I wonder what the president said.
Well, the president brought up, when he was elected to the Senate, he was actually too young to be sworn in. And just, a few days before on his birthday was able to go in. And he asked me if it was the same situation. I said, no, Mr. President, you have me beat on that. I'm already old enough to be sworn in on January 3rd. And so it was great to talk with him. And, he was elected at a very young age, too. And so he understands that experience.
A big issue you ran on is guns. I mean, you've called your generation the mass shooting generation, obviously representing Orlando in that area, following Parkland, following the Pulse nightclub shooting. What specifically will you push for in Congress on gun legislation?
Well, there's a lot that we need to do, right? I mean, just a few months ago, the leading cause of death for children went from automobile accidents to gun violence. So our children are literally on the front lines of this issue. Something that is universally accepted that people are excited about is universal background checks. Very simple. Most Republicans and most NRA members are for universal background checks. And so for me, it feels like the new purpose of bipartisanship and what people call bipartisanship as far as gun violence is concerned is what the NRA accepts. And that's not what it should be. It should be what the people are for, and universal background checks is something that we need to pass.
Let me ask you this finally. You talk a lot about, in your words, changing Florida. We just saw you win your district. We also just saw a resounding victory by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. What do you make of that victory, and can you work with him together? Does changing Florida mean working with him?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, a lot of what we saw was not a red wave. A red wave is when there's more and more turnout than there's ever been. What we saw is that there was a blue deficit. Democrats did not turn out in the way that they needed to. And I think as Democrats, we need to have year-round organizing. That's something my campaign is going to do every day, starting in January, knocking doors, not just to get people out to vote, but to build power. So that way, when election time comes around, you're not persuading people that it's important to vote. You're just reminding them about it. And if folks want to help that, they can go to prospercongress.com. And I really believe that that year-round power building is how we're going to win this state. And I'm excited to do that work.
25 years old, Mr. Congressman-elect, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and we'll be right back.
Good morning, everyone. So glad you could join us. I'm Don Lemon. So while you were sleeping, a huge midterm election night. CNN special coverage following all the competitive races. Here we are. Republicans predicted a red wave. That did not happen. It was more like a ripple, and it's still playing out. So we're going to see. The chances of Democrats keeping the Senate, that is still a real possibility. So here's where we are right now this morning. The battle for the House majority, down to the wire here. So far, Democrats have 178 seats. The magic number for them to keep control is 30. Republicans leading with 199. The magic number for them to take control is 16. So the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, already claiming victory, even though ballots are still being counted. And in the Senate, the chamber still hangs in the balance here. Republicans hoping to gain control. Here are four key races that we're watching. We're watching Nevada, we're watching Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia. CNN has yet to make any projections on those. In Nevada, though, Republican Adam Laxalt inching ahead. The race is very, very close there. And then in Wisconsin, the Democrat Mandela Barnes trails Republican Senator Ron Johnson. In Arizona, incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Kelly currently in the lead right now, but we're watching it very closely, so hang on for that. And in Georgia, Republican Herschel Walker and incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock locked in a very tight race. It appears a runoff next month is likely on the horizon there. We have CNN team coverage on the ground, standing by everywhere. But first, we want to get straight to John Berman. He is at the Magic Wall for us. John, hello to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Where are we as far as the House of Representatives now?
Just very quickly to reiterate what you said, in terms of the races where we have projected a winner, Republicans now at 199, Democrats at 178. In terms of where Republicans are ahead, they're ahead in 221 and Democrats ahead in 214. This would give Republicans control, but barely. Not the night they were hoping for. Again, we have a lot of races still left to count. We're watching the results come in. Let me switch over to the Senate, because this is something right now. In terms of races that have been called, it's tied 48 to 48. The races that have yet to be called are Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. And again, if I tell you who's ahead in each of these states right now, that would mean we would be at a 50-50 Senate. 50-50, which would be okay for the Democrats because the Vice President Kamala Harris would break the tie. But let me walk you through each of these states, starting with what I didn't show you. Again, Pennsylvania, actually John Fetterman's lead has increased in Pennsylvania over the last several minutes. Some new votes must have come in Pennsylvania. He was ahead by 2.5 points. He's now ahead by 2.8 points. CNN has projected that John Fetterman will win the Senate race in Pennsylvania. We thought this might be the decisive, I should say, Senate race there. He ran an amazing race in terms of where he outperformed Joe Biden 2 years ago, almost everywhere. You can see John Fetterman did particularly well in some of the red areas there. Quite a race for him. This is a Democratic pickup, which changes the overall landscape and makes it slightly easier for them to maintain control. Let's look at Wisconsin. As I said, Ron Johnson is ahead there, the Republican incumbent. He's ahead by about 1.8%. We haven't seen that many more votes counted lately. We are waiting on Milwaukee in Wisconsin, the most populous of the counties. Mandela Barnes has a lead there, just 82% in. Of the remaining vote, would it be enough to give him 31,000 votes to make up that margin? It'd be tough. It'd be tough for him to do that. Let's go out to Nevada right now. You can see in Nevada, 80% reporting Adam Laxalt right now with a small lead of 22,000 votes over the Democratic incumbent, Catherine Cortez Masto. This switched overnight. Yeah. If people got some sleep, we didn't. If people got some sleep, they may have gone to sleep with Masto ahead, Cortez Masto ahead. Now she is trailing. Importantly, Clark County, the most populous county in the state, 75% of the vote, 84% in. They've counted all the Election Day vote in Clark County. It's the mail vote. We don't know how much mail vote is out there. Yeah. Is there enough mail vote for her to make up the margins in the state overall, 22,000 votes?
We saw Sarah Seidner there earlier, and she's on the ground. She's saying Democrats are feeling optimistic about that because it is Clark County, and it typically leans Democrat, but those mail-in votes, as you say, Arizona, can be different.
This was a county that Joe Biden won by 9.4.
Nevada, I should say, excuse me.
In Nevada. This is a county that Joe Biden won by 9.4%. Rosa Flores was there. And if Democrats are feeling good, you know, she's underperforming against what Joe Biden did in Nevada. So, again, we'll see if the mail-in ballot skews Democratic as it tends to. Maybe there is enough remaining vote for her to make up the margins there. Let's go to Arizona. Mark Kelly, the incumbent Democrat there, is leading Blake Masters, 68% in, 100,000 vote margin. However, that margin has been shrinking. As more and more vote comes in, Masters edges closer and closer to Kelly. We saw this in the presidential race 2 years ago with Joe Biden, who ultimately, I should say, only won by 10,000 votes. A victory is a victory, right? He had a larger lead earlier in the week. As the week progressed and more votes counted, Donald Trump got closer, but ultimately Biden prevailed. That's what Democrats hope will happen in Arizona, that Mark Kelly will be able to hang on. Maricopa County, the most populous county in the state, 68% reporting, a county that Joe Biden carried by 2 points. You can see Kelly ahead there by about 8 points. We've been told all the Election Day ballot has been counted. All that's left is mail-in ballot, a lot of mail-in ballot. Again, will that skew towards the Democrats? We don't know. Let's finish in Georgia as we have been. Why? Well,
there's why.
There's why, right? We may not know what happens in Georgia for some time. Right now, Raphael Warnock is ahead. He's got 49.2% of the vote, but the key number in Georgia is 50. You need to get to 50% plus one vote, or it goes to a runoff. That runoff will be in December, the first week of December. The Secretary of State's office, we just heard from Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, it looks like this is going to a runoff. The campaigns, our Jeff Zeleny is reporting, are already preparing for the runoff in Georgia. They think that is where this is going to go. There is still some vote to be counted, just 96% in. Where is that vote? Might be interesting to see here. The bigger and the bluer the circle, the more the vote. So there is a lot of vote for Democrats around the Atlanta area, but the experts who are watching this say they don't believe it will be enough to get Warnock to 50%.
To get to 50 plus one. I'm getting my Arizona and my Nevada.
And again, the reason that matters
There's closer
here,
proximity. Yeah.
If you take out Georgia here, then Democrats are only at 49, right? All right, 49 here. If you take out Georgia, right? But if they have the runoff and they're able to win Georgia, that would give them the 50. Kamala Harris would break the tie. They control the Senate.
Didn't we warn everyone? They weren't going to know. This is going to take some time.
You may not know. However, look,
not hyperbole.
If for some reason Mark Kelly is able to hang on in Arizona and Catherine Cortez Masto is able to retake the lead in Nevada, then the runoff would not matter in terms of control of the U.S.
All right, I want you to stand by Mr. Magic Wall, John Berman, because we're going to get to Victor Blackwell. He's at the voting desk with news coming out of Arizona and Nevada. We've been covering it all morning since 2 a.m. Close in proximity, and the situations are fairly similar as well, Victor.
Yeah, similar between what we're seeing in Maricopa County, also in several counties in Nevada. Maricopa County, they're going now and checking those signatures on the drop-off ballots that have been sent into those offices. Listen, we're going to be in a posture for several hours where we are waiting for those votes to be tabulated, the ones that have been dropped off. I think we have video of them being scanned, those signatures on those ballots. They're going through, they're going to determine if the signatures on these ballots match the signatures that they have on file. There we go. This was tweeted out by the elections department there in Maricopa County. And then those will be added. We're expecting to get these added sometime this evening. So at 8 Eastern, we've got quite a while until we get the votes added from the largest county there in Arizona. In Nevada, these are the drop boxes. And again, in these two states, when John says that we don't know how many there are, that's because the elections departments in these states, they have not told us exactly how many of these ballots can be added and how just a few thousand votes, one way or another, can really change the direction of these races. But these were not counted on Election Day. They're getting these out and going through the process with these ballots as well. So while in these counties we have seen the Election Day votes being added, we're still waiting for these other votes in both Maricopa County, the largest county there in Arizona, and in the largest counties in Nevada, Clark County, Washoe, Douglas, a smaller county there, those to be added as well. So it's going to take some time. I've been saying it since 2 a.m., Don, you say we've been sitting here. Be easy. It's going to take a little while, but the process is working smoothly. We're not seeing any hiccups. There were challenges in Maricopa County on Election Day. Officials there said that there would not be any disruption in the counting. So that's happening as it should, but it's going to take some time to get these drop box and the drop-off ballot count in those two states.
I got to tell you, we have the magic wall here, but John and I were both fascinated by that video you just ran that was tweeted out to watch those ballots being counted.
Because it looked like a cool robot, is what it looked like.
It is there. I mean, it is fascinating because, I mean, just look.
It is the figurative and literal machinery of the vote. Right. This is how it happens.
And it's how it's supposed to happen. That's what's supposed to happen in Arizona. And as Victor was saying, in Nevada, what's supposed to happen, the law in Nevada is the mail-in ballot just needs to be postmarked by yesterday, by Election Day. It can actually arrive today, tomorrow, over the next few days, counted by Saturday. So we really just don't know how many mail ballots are left to count here.
And you know what that means, Caitlin? That means do you not know how the candidates are? They hate to concede. They're saying, so there's still a chance?
Let's see if we can speed that machine up anymore. All right, President Biden watched the returns come in late into the night last night as he was also making congratulatory calls to at least 30 Democratic candidates. One was a text that he sent to John Fetterman, given his race was called so late into the night. The White House, though, is still waiting to see which party is going to control the House, which party is going to control the Senate, given a GOP majority in the House will undoubtedly make Biden's presidency more difficult. MJ Lee's at the White House. MJ, what are you hearing from officials this morning?
Well, I can tell you that one race and one man that the White House is in an especially good mood about this morning is John Fetterman. This is a candidate, of course, that has now allowed Democrats to pick up a Senate seat by defeating Republican candidate Mehmet Oz. And as you said, the president did text Fetterman overnight, and a White House official notably told my colleague Phil Mattingly overnight, quote, the president had a great time with the senator-elect on Saturday. So, Caitlin, this is a not so subtle reminder from this White House that the president did campaign with Fetterman at the very end, and that ended up standing out because, remember, at the very end, he ended up going to a lot of these blue or easier areas like Maryland, New York, California, and it was rare to see the president actually physically campaigning alongside some of the most vulnerable candidates. Fetterman ended up being an exception to that. So it won't be a surprise if later today we see White House officials, the president himself, trying to take credit for what was a very important win for Democrats.
Yeah, nothing on Biden's schedule yet. We will see if that changes. MJ Lee, thanks for that update. And up next, we are going to speak to Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace. She won her re-election bid last night. That only came months after Trump had endorsed her challenger in the primary. We'll wait to see what she has to say about what the takeaways are from last night. All right, back to our special coverage of the midterm elections. Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace from South Carolina is heading back to Capitol Hill for a second term. She defeated her Trump-endorsed challenger in the primary and took on Annie Andrews, a Democrat, last night and won. This was a competitive race in South Carolina's 1st congressional district, which represents the Charleston area. The district has been seesawing in recent years between Republican and Democrat. So joining us now is Congresswoman Nancy Mace. First, coming into last night, what were the expectations were coming out of that? It is not the red wave that some had been predicting. So I wonder if you were surprised by that.
I was actually surprised by the outcome of our own election. South Carolina's 1st congressional district is a swing district. It's a place where Republicans are outnumbered 2-1 by Democrats and independents. And I will tell you, my polling had us down in single digits leading into the final couple of days of the race. We worked really hard in the last 2 weeks to get a message to talk about inflation, to talk about crime, and also to talk about abortion. That was a top issue for us in this election. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, I didn't turn away. I leaned into it and talked about my experiences as a victim of rape. And I think those messages and seeing the outpouring of support yesterday at the polls was huge. I mean, we won by a double-digit margin. We outperformed every poll we had out in the field. We outperformed 2020 by huge margins because I only won this district by 1 point only 2 years ago.
Yeah, I remember that well. And so what do you have to say about your other Republican colleagues? Did you expect them to perform better across the board than they did last night?
I did. I was seeing the turnout that we had. I thought that's the way the rest of the country was. But I see my district as a bellwether. And I worked hard to let people know that I stood with my party on most things, but I also stood against my party on other issues. And it's important in bellwether districts or swing districts to really showcase your independence, your independent streak. And we did that in the months, not only in the primary, but also in the months leading up to the general election. And what was overwhelming last night to see that message and the examples of being an independent voice, that really resonated with voters, not just on the Republican side, but on both sides of the aisle last night.
We're waiting to see if there is going to be a Republican majority in the House and what that majority is going to look like when it comes to the margin. Will you support Kevin McCarthy for House Speaker if the Republicans do take the majority?
Right. I already have given my commitment to Kevin McCarthy as Speaker for our conference. I am cautiously optimistic. I do think Republicans will have a majority. I've been very cautious on our majority because I represent, again, I think a snapshot of the rest of the nation. And I really hope that, when we get into the next legislative term, we look at what is going to bring our nation together. We are so divided right now. Political violence is real. The divisiveness is real. And I want to see us work together on issues that matter, like inflation, like the supply chain, figuring out how we protect women's rights and the right to life. How do we do that together on both sides of the aisle? And I'm someone that has reached out across the aisle and worked with Democrats on a number of issues. I've passed a lot of bills working together, and my door is open. And I'm willing to work with anyone who's willing to work with us.
Congresswoman, I didn't hear you mention impeachment there. As you know, there are some of your Republican colleagues who want to pursue that for some members of the Biden administration, maybe even President Biden himself on day one. What do you think of that?
Well, it's not something that I support at this juncture without a heavy investigation. Impeachment has been weaponized over the years, and we've seen that in the last 5 years or so. We need to really focus on economic issues. Inflation is killing us. We're all still paying a lot for a gallon of gas right now. At the grocery store, prices are sky high. We have a scarcity in marine diesel at our port in Charleston all along the eastern seaboard. That's only going to make prices go up. And so we need to focus on the supply chain, focus on the economy, focus on jobs, focus on crime. Crime was a huge issue. But also, when it comes to life after Roe, how can we all work together to get us in the right place where the majority of Americans want us to be? And that message of working together is what has resonated in our district and in swing districts across the country last night.
If it's a smaller Republican majority, do you think it's going to make it tougher to govern in the way that you'd like to see a Republican majority do?
I think right now with the divisiveness in our country, until we're willing to take a stand and reach across the aisle, it's going to be difficult for anyone to govern. We've seen a lot of partisanship. I've seen it on both sides of the aisle. partisanship. And so that's something that as a nation, our elected leaders at the federal, state, and local level, we have to get beyond that. We have to get beyond Twitter, and we have to work hard and deliver for our constituents. And when you have a diverse district, diverse with Democrats, independents, and Republicans like mine, that means we got to reach across the aisle, even if we get threatened, even if we get attacked on social media. We need to do the right thing, even when no one is watching.
Trump endorsed your primary challenger back in the primary. You obviously defeated her and went on to win and win last night. Some of the other candidates that Trump endorsed also did not have successful election nights last night. What does that say about the power of a Trump endorsement in the Republican Party in 2022?
I've always marched to the beat of my own drum. I've always had very much an independent streak, and you're seeing that in other races. We saw that with Brian Kemp and Raffensperger last night. We've seen Ron DeSantis. He had enormous gains last night in Florida. And I think South Carolina's 1st congressional district is a lot like Florida in terms of the issues that were addressed in the elections, the diversity of the population there, the migration and the movement and growth that both states have had. And so when you look at those that really have worked to be centrist on a lot of issues that are important to Americans, that's where we saw big wins last night. And I'm excited about what the future holds and what the majority will look like next session.
We'll be waiting to see what it looks like as well, as in addition to who has that majority. Congresswoman Nancy Mace, thank you for taking time to join us this morning to talk about all of these important issues.
Thank you.
The votes are still being counted, as we said. Right now in Arizona, it is still underway. Poll workers in one county had to move fast to fix a problem at the polls there. We'll talk to the man in charge of those issues next.
Are you tough and strong? Are you willing to continue this fight? Are you willing for incompetency to play itself out and the victory to come at us?
I know that we're all eager to find out who won each of these incredibly important races, but we need to be patient and wait for every vote to be counted.
Gubernatorial candidates there from Arizona. Maricopa County in Arizona experiencing glitches with some tabulation scanners malfunctioning at about 20% of their polling stations. State election officials say that the issue was resolved swiftly, pointing to a technical problem with printer ink. Officials were able to resume the count and say the issue did not compromise the integrity of the election. And yet, Republican candidate for governor in Arizona, Kari Lake, questioned the process there. So listen, let's discuss now with someone who knows about it. Joining me now to talk to us more about what happened is Maricopa County Board of Supervisors Chair Bill Gates. Chair, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning to you. Don Lemon here, as well as John Berman. We're both going to ask you a couple of questions here. I just want to know, should voters there in Maricopa County, should they be concerned about their votes and whether their votes will be counted?
Well, thanks for having me. And no, they should not be concerned, as you just mentioned there, because of the great work of our poll workers and our technicians to determine what the issue was. We were able to get those tabulators back online, and you're right, the issue was with the printers and with the ink. But here is the bottom line for everyone. Everyone who showed up yesterday with valid ID, because we have a voter ID law here in Arizona, they had the opportunity to vote a ballot, and that vote is going to be counted. And here's what we know now that we've looked at the numbers. About 7% of the ballots that were voted yesterday on Election Day went down into what we call Box 3. So they were not run through the tabulator. They're at the vote center, but they are secure, and they will be tabulated in our central count facility.
Okay, can you clarify that? Because we had heard there was a tweet from Maricopa County that we saw that all Election Day vote had already been processed. Is that different than being counted? Has all Election Day vote been counted at this point?
Yeah, not all election votes have been counted. We've had a little bit, somewhere around 210,000 or so, but those 17,000 have yet to be counted, and we will be starting that process today.
So 17,000 Election Day votes, in-person Election Day votes, as distinct from mail ballots?
That's right. So we have about 90,000 mail ballots. These are ones that came in after Friday, but before yesterday. Those are yet to be counted. And then also, we don't know how many mail-ins came in yesterday. So in other words, under Arizona law, our residents can take a mail-in ballot and drop it off on Election Day. We do believe estimates, probably about 200,000 more. We will know by about mid-morning today, and we'll be able to report an exact number.
You said after Friday, but before yesterday. Does that change any of the calculations that you're making here?
No, but it does give us a breakdown of the votes. So 17,000 in-person votes left to be counted, in-person Election Day votes to be counted in Maricopa County, about 90,000 mail-in ballots that were received by Friday, and then a certain number, and I'm not sure I fully understood, 200,000 that arrived between yesterday. You don't know that.
Yeah, roughly. Again, those all came in late last night from our different locations. They're at the central tabulation center. But like I said, we'll have firmer numbers mid-morning today.
Can I ask you about, because of that technical issue, there was this lawsuit to keep the polls open an extra 3 hours. A judge denying this request that the polls closed on time there, or to be extended. So what do you say those who are using, because there are people, you know, even the candidates who are using this to try to cast doubt on the integrity of the voting process there?
Well, again, we've been dealing with that here for a couple of years. A lot of misinformation out there that we've had to address. Here's the bottom line. We apologize for the inconvenience that people had to deal with yesterday. We certainly did not want to have that happen. But what happened yesterday should not be used to question the integrity of the election. Again, everyone who was checked in, who showed up with a valid ID, they had the opportunity to vote, and those votes are going to count. The 17,000 or so that I mentioned to you that didn't go through the tabulator at the vote center, they have been secure since they were placed in that box 3. They were transported by a bipartisan board, Republican and Democrat, down to the central count facility. And like I said, today we will start the process of counting those at the central count facility where all of our early ballots are. And by the way, in a majority of Arizona counties, day of election votes are counted just that way. They're counted at the central count facility, not out on site at the vote center.
On the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, Bill Gates there. Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. So, John, it's interesting to see how many votes. That's a lot of votes out. And you said it doesn't really change the calculation.
Well, I know it's hard to tell. So you have 17,000 Election Day. I'll put Election Day. That's what ED stands for here in this case, Don. Let's do 90,000 mail that will arrive by Friday, and then another number that was indeterminate, right? Undetermined. He said it could be, I think, as much as 200,000 of people who walked them in or arrived yesterday. So just don't know. I mean, I will tell you here, you would think this 17,000 votes Election Day favors Republicans. You would think this 90,000 mail that arrived by Friday favors Democrats. And then that remaining number, which we don't have a hard grasp on yet, who knows?
All right. John Berman, thank you very much. Meantime, Governor Ron DeSantis cruising to re-election over Charlie Crist. What his victory now means for the political future and several potential 2024 rivals.
Florida was a refuge of sanity when the world went mad. We stood as a citadel of freedom for people across this country and indeed across the world. We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. Florida is where woke goes to die.
Okay, everyone, Don Lemon here. The 2022 midterms may be giving us a big clue about the 2024 Republican presidential primary. The perfect person to talk to about that, Harry Enten, at the battleground desk. Harry, we've talked a lot about Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis. He had a big win last night. Where does he play come 2024, you think?
Well, I mean, look, let's start off with the fact that obviously the big elephant in the room is Donald Trump. And I think there are a lot of Republican voters who are going to be second-guessing whether or not he should be their standard bearer come 2024. Why? Take a look at this exit poll that we did nationally. Look at This is the favorable opinions. Look at how many voters had only a favorable opinion of Donald Trump. 38%. You add it with the Biden and Trump, just 39% of voters nationally had a favorable opinion of Donald Trump. Now, I want to notice that 18% of the neither Biden nor Trump number at the bottom of your screen. Take a look at how they decided to vote this election. They went for Republican candidates for the House, but only by a 17-point margin. These are voters who had an unfavorable view of Joe Biden, yet they still went only Republican by 17 points. And it's because Donald Trump kept these voters from going overwhelmingly towards the Democratic Party. Now let's look at Ron DeSantis. Let's look at his approval rating in the state of Florida. Look at this. A 58% approval rating in the state of Florida. That is much more popular than Donald Trump was nationally. Now, looking ahead to 2024, the idea, okay, in Florida, do you want Ron DeSantis to run for president? You can see it's a pretty close match here. 45% say yes. Yes, the majority, 53%, said no. But compare that to Donald Trump among Floridians, because remember, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis both live in the state of Florida. Look at how many Floridians want Donald Trump to run for president in 2024. Just 33%. So in the state that knows Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump well, Ron DeSantis is the choice for 2024. And I'll tell you this much, Don, given that large victory he had last night, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Republicans nationally start feeling the same way.
And didn't Donald Trump give up his New York citizenship to become a residency to become a Florida resident?
He did. He did. And it turns out Floridians might not necessarily want him. Maybe he'll send him back to New York.
Harry, thank you very much. Poppy, that tees up. There's a lot that you can chew on when it comes to that.
What you're going to hear next might blow your socks off because it blew mine off. Let's just pull up the New York Post, guys, if we can, in the control room. The future, okay? This is the New York Post.
Someone's not going to like that.
Well, now I want you to listen to Democratic strategist Hillary Rosen. We just heard DeSantis say, when Florida was a refuge when the world went mad, and you say...
Oh, you're so bad, Poppy.
You said it.
You know, I was in Florida then a bit. It was kind of true. Like it was kind of a refuge. But look, Ron DeSantis would be a terrible president. I'm not for him for president. I think there is a little bit of a rethinking about how the country handled COVID. Were schools kept closed too long? Were businesses closed too long? That is actually legitimate, and a lot of Democrats and Republicans. It's a nonpartisan issue that we should think about for the next pandemic. But look. What's going to happen is
full of the surprises.
Donald Trump is going to announce he's going to run for president. We're going to sit back and enjoy this fight between the two of them. And I have to say, you know, given the election results, Joe Biden, the happy warrior, despite the headwinds, despite his approval rating, he's going to find newfound energy in being the Donald Trump foe again. And that's going to be interesting as well.
Or the DeSantis. Oh, we'll see where this thing goes. You worked for Trump. You worked in the Trump White House. You left on January 6th. Is DeSantis the future?
I think so. I mean, you look at the huge night he had. I think that should send a massive signal to the Republican Party and show what he's capable of. I mean, Donald Trump, we saw in that one poll that Floridians don't want to see him run in 2024. But DeSantis is someone who potentially could be a formidable opponent for, Joe Biden if he runs again in 2024. And I think that DeSantis has a good message on COVID, as we were saying, that, he kept Florida free and wasn't about lockdowns. And that's something that he can push, whereas he can say, Trump listened to the bureaucrats in Washington like Dr. Fauci, who wanted this country locked down.
So what about, Tom, for never Trump, former conservative, turn independents?
Well, I think we're all making an assumption that Donald Trump can be pushed out of the way a little more easily than he's going to be pushed out of the way. This begins a lot of knife fighting in the party because so many people in the Republican Party invested in him as a cult of personality. It's hard to back up from that to say, well, now I no longer support the president. We heard the lieutenant governor of Georgia say it's time to get past Trump. Well, good luck with that. Donald Trump's entire political life is that people can't get past
But didn't voters just get past Trump? A lot of them tonight?
I think that remains to be seen, especially within...
Primary is different than a general.
Right.
And so, he prevailed in the primary a lot, just not in the general.
Yeah, that's a good point. Michael.
For somebody who hates
He worked in the Biden White House.
Yes. And I would say this is the third time I've seen Joe Biden defy political gravity. An improbable comeback in the primary, unseating an incumbent president, which is very hard to do. And last night, Kevin McCarthy a year ago said they were going to win 60 seats in the House.
Then he said 20 to our Melanie Zanona a few days ago.
There you go. The goalpost keeps changing.
Yeah.
But what I would also say is that Republicans have to make a choice. And I think DeSantis is offering that choice, but do they want to follow Donald Trump down another path of losing them the House, losing them the Senate, maybe twice, losing them the White House?
But DeSantis, it plays into that too, and I think Democrats will have a message. Because, look, I think the big untold story right now is how women came through and this abortion question. It really mattered to voters. It was a big issue in the House. Exit polls showed that people wanted to vote on the economy, but often voted on abortion and other things. And, that is going to matter because that is what a president is in charge of, Supreme Court appointments. This still matters. And I do think that will push back. And I think that helps us it's important. That's where we have to focus.
You guys have been great. Thanks for a long night. Made it easier being by your side, Caitlin.
I know, we miss you over here in the studio.
I miss
Poppy.
you. She's down the hall, by the way. I'm going to come give you a hug right after this.
We don't like... The three of us don't like being separated this long.
I missed Don, too.
All right. Well, we are still also watching to see, the Senate race in Ohio was decided overnight. We're waiting on a few others, but we did see that J.D. Vance, the Republican author and venture capitalist, did win that seat there. He defeated Democrat Tim Ryan by nearly 7 points. Ryan did make a point about democracy, though, in his concession.
I have the privilege to concede this race to J.D. Vance, because the way this country operates is that when you lose an election, you concede. And you respect the will of the people, right? We can't have a system where if you win, it's a legitimate election, and if you lose, someone stole it.
Tim Ryan going out of his way to make that point, saying he had the privilege to concede this race. It's sad that that is kind of where things are, that you have to actually watch for these concession speeches now. But what do you make of that?
No, I mean, I think it is sad. This used to be the norm among candidates, that they would come out and they would concede, whether they were presidential candidates or candidates for dog catcher. And now we have this, I think, Republican chattering class that likes to sow all sorts of doubt into final results. We, of course, saw that around 2020. We'll continue to see that. One question is whether or not Donald Trump starts to do that with these elections that we've seen, over the past day or so. Like, does he start to sow doubt because he wants to take credit? He wants to act like everything, is rigged. So we'll see what happens. But good on Tim Ryan. And of course he was going to do that.
Of course he was. And look, I think we should say this is still normal. Democracy depends upon people acknowledging losses. And that's what Tim Ryan did. And that's what most people do. It's the extremists. The election deniers are the outliers. And one of the takeaways last night is that most of them lost when they were at the top of their ticket. Right? We still have to see what happens in Arizona. Also should be said that Tim Ryan ran a really good race. Mike DeWine won the state by almost 1 million votes. And there were almost 400,000 folks who split their tickets and voted for Tim Ryan. So that's why the election denialism is so outside democratic norms that it needs to be called out. And we need to track each one who says, yes, they'll accept the results if they win, and no, they won't if they lose, because it's uniquely dangerous to democracy. And I think the fact that Democrats narrowly won independent voters last night, which is so outside the norm for midterm elections, speaks to them saying this kind of extremism is too much. This is too dangerous. This is destabilizing to who we are. So I think why moderates also went for Democrats. So it's a state. A lot of election deniers will win lower ballots. But the top of the ticket having a bad night, I think, is a repudiation of Donald Trump and the kind of extremism that election denialism represents.
Another thing to note about concessions, though, is Stacey Abrams obviously famously did
Yes.
not concede her last race to Brian Kemp. She did concede last night. When it comes to what we heard from J.D. Vance opposite Tim Ryan in Ohio, He thanked a lot of people, dozens of people. One of them, noticeably, was not former President Trump, who, of course, backed him.
Yeah, listen, he is a senator because Donald Trump backed him in that primary, and you can see him possibly already trying to form his own identity, that, you know, form some distance between him and Donald Trump. Good luck with that. And listen, I think in the coming days, we've got to see what Donald Trump does. I think sort of the battle between him and Ron DeSantis, the future, is going to be very interesting. I mean, he's already sort of warning shots saying, like, this is going to be bad for DeSantis if he runs. Well, and he knows stuff about DeSantis that he's going to reveal.
We're out of time. It's just interesting also to see, you know, what other Republicans say about how the effect that he still has on this party. Both of you, thank you for spending so many hours here with me this morning. I really enjoyed it. No one I'd rather sit next to. So. We still have 4 Senate races, though, determining the balance of power. The votes are still coming in. They are still being counted. We have the latest as CNN's special coverage continues. We're going to take a short break. Don't go anywhere.
Well, my friends came back.
Yeah. You know what polls really matter?
Yeah.
The ones on election night. That's what
Oh,
really
yeah.
matters. The voters.
The non-polls, the votes.
When you go to the polls and you actually vote. That's what really matters. We can sit around, the pundits can say what they want, they can do what they want, and this politician can say that and this stuff. The people have their say, and the people have spoken. The votes are still being counted, but it wasn't what many people thought it was going to be.
Where's the wave?
It shows you the American people can always surprise you. You always have to see what the issues are, listen to what people are saying. You know, abortion did keep Democrats in this fight. Inflation, the economy, though, did still show up as a really big issue. And we're not done yet. We still have to make sure to figure out who is in control of the Senate, who's in control of the House.
I think
It's going to go to December.
I think we're going to be there every morning along with people telling them what's going on. But I think what I'm left with is 2 things. Abortion was a bigger issue than the polls were saying, that's for sure. And the economy. It's the economy stupid. It was in 92. It's now. But now it's on the people that are elected to solve for folks and to come up with solutions on the economy and to actually do things that they promised.
You know what was on the ballot? And
What?
people said it was a bad message from Joe Biden and the Democrats. Democracy really was on the ballot.
that's such a good point. It
Especially if you
was.
look at what happened with election deniers, and there's still some votes to be counted around the country. For the most part, they did not fare well, and people, I think, were more concerned. As I have said, the economy is always important. But what's, I think, more important is reality for people, because the economy goes up and down, prices go up and down.
Final thought?
Georgia Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, too, talking about candidate quality really does matter. He said Mitch McConnell was right.
All right.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you joining us. We're going to be back here. I'm not sure when, sometime
We're gonna be
overnight.
back in a few
the morning
hours.
hours in a few hours. So make sure you stay tuned, though, because CNN's special coverage continues with our colleague Anderson Cooper next.
7 hours done.
I know.